I never thought a simple evening of watering plants could make my heart ache, until she whispered, "I'm lonely without you." The evening sun draped the neighborhood in a golden haze, softening the sharp edges of the world. From my window, I noticed her for the first time that day, standing on her balcony, watering her plants with a quiet precision that seemed almost ritualistic. The gentle sway of her hair caught the light, strands of chestnut and gold shimmering in a way that made it impossible not to watch. There was something mesmerizing in her movements, the delicate tilt of her head as she inspected a drooping leaf, the subtle arch of her back as she leaned over the railing, and the careful way she handled the watering can, as if every drop of water mattered. I found myself lingering there, though I told myself it was nothing more than idle curiosity. Still, my chest tightened in a way that was new and unfamiliar. There was a grace in her presence that seemed effortless, a combination of quiet strength and vulnerability that I couldn't quite name. She moved with confidence, yet each time she paused, she seemed small, almost fragile, as though the weight of something unsaid pressed gently against her shoulders. I noticed the little details, the soft rustle of her clothes as she shifted from one plant to another, the faint scent of soil mixed with the hint of jasmine drifting through the air, and the subtle way the sunlight kissed her skin, highlighting the gentle curve of her neck and the soft contours of her face. It wasn't just her appearance, it was the way she existed in that moment, entirely absorbed in her world, and yet somehow unknowingly inviting mine to brush against it. For a long while, I didn't move. I didn't even think about speaking or approaching. I simply watched, feeling the slow pull of curiosity and something deeper, something warm and unfamiliar, tugging at my chest. There was a rhythm to her movements, a quiet poetry in how she attended to each plant, and I realized I was noticing things I would have never seen before, the small hesitations before she touched a delicate petal, the way she straightened after each task as if to gather herself, and the occasional soft exhale that suggested thoughts she kept to herself. A breeze stirred, carrying the faint rustle of leaves and the whisper of distant voices from the street below. She paused, watering can in hand, and I caught her in a moment of stillness. Her gaze lifted slightly, as if sensing my presence from somewhere far off, and for a second, our eyes almost met, but I quickly looked away, my heartbeat a little too loud in my own ears. That single brush with awareness was enough to make the world feel heavier, slower, more deliberate. I realized then that I had been holding my breath, not wanting to break the quiet intimacy of the moment. I wasn't just observing her, I was learning her rhythms, understanding her solitude without a word spoken, feeling a connection in the space between us that neither of us had claimed yet. There was a magnetic pull in her presence, subtle but undeniable, the kind that makes you linger in thought long after the moment has passed. And as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across her balcony, I understood something I hadn't before. This wasn't just curiosity. It was the first gentle tug of something far more complicated, something that would grow slowly, quietly, and irresistibly, if only I let it. I found myself lingering near her balcony more often than I cared to admit, drawn by something I couldn't yet name. That evening, the soft hum of the city beneath us seemed quieter, almost protective, as if it were granting us a moment of private space. She was there again, tending to her plants, fingers brushing against the leaves with a careful reverence. I hesitated at the window, my hands gripping the sill, unsure whether to call out or simply remain an observer in the safe distance of silence. Finally, something compelled me to speak. "That one looks delicate," I said, nodding toward a small, drooping fern. My voice sounded foreign to my own ears, awkward, tentative, yet genuine. She glanced up, startled for a fraction of a second, then a smile slowly curved her lips, gentle and welcoming. "It is," she said softly, her voice carrying warmth that made the space between us feel smaller. "I've been trying to keep it alive for weeks." Her gaze held mine for a heartbeat longer than necessary, and I felt an unexpected pull in my chest, a mixture of curiosity and a strange, quiet longing. She tilted her head slightly, studying me with a subtle, almost playful intensity, as if weighing whether my presence was intrusive or welcome. I sensed her vulnerability hidden behind that confident exterior, a hint of loneliness she wasn't ready to voice, yet it resonated through the faint tremor in her smile. We spoke in small, cautious exchanges, each word carefully measured. I asked about a blooming orchid, genuinely interested in its care, and she leaned forward to show me its delicate petals. Her fingers brushed mine accidentally, a fleeting touch that lingered in memory far longer than it should have. I felt the warmth of her hand against mine, the softness of her skin, and the unexpected comfort of it. It was a moment suspended in time, intimate yet perfectly safe, like a secret shared without words. There was a rhythm to our conversation, broken by pauses that spoke more than our words could convey. She laughed softly at my clumsy attempts to sound knowledgeable about plants, and I noticed the way her shoulders relaxed when she smiled, how her eyes crinkled at the corners, conveying a warmth that went beyond mere politeness. Each glance, each subtle movement, was a thread weaving a fragile connection between us. The air was rich with the scent of damp soil and fresh leaves, mingling with the faint aroma of her perfume, a subtle hint of vanilla and something floral I couldn't quite name. A soft breeze moved through the balcony, lifting loose strands of her hair, and instinctively, I wanted to tuck them back, to offer some small comfort. Yet I hesitated, caught between desire and restraint, aware that this delicate moment needed care, not force. By the time I finally stepped back, the sun had begun its descent, painting the sky in muted shades of amber and rose. I felt a quiet satisfaction, mingled with a growing anticipation. Something significant had shifted, small, almost imperceptible, yet undeniably present. The tension lingered in the air, unspoken but palpable, a gentle acknowledgement that our worlds were inching closer together. And as I walked away, I knew I would return, drawn again to her presence, to the soft intimacy of her laughter and the subtle warmth that seemed to radiate from her very being. The next evening, I found myself walking past her building almost unconsciously, drawn by the thought of seeing her again. She was on the balcony, as if waiting for me, though I knew it was impossible for her to be, and the soft glow of the setting sun framed her silhouette like a quiet painting. This time, she held a small, flowering plant in her hands, tilting it toward the light as though seeking permission from the sun itself. I hesitated at the edge of the balcony, then spoke, my voice softer than before, "That one looks like it has a story." She glanced up, and there was a flicker of surprise that melted quickly into a smile. "It does," she said, her voice carrying a gentle warmth that made the world feel a little lighter. "I rescued it from the shop yesterday. It was practically forgotten, but I thought it deserved a chance." She extended it slightly toward me, as if inviting me to take part in this small act of care. Our fingers brushed when I reached for the pot, and the contact sent a tiny shiver up my arm, a silent acknowledgement of closeness without needing words. As I leaned against the railing, she began to talk, softly at first, about the plant, then about small things in her life, the way she liked her coffee in the mornings, the rhythm of her favorite books, moments of quiet she cherished. There was no pretense in her words, only a steady, sincere openness that made it easy to listen, to connect. I shared pieces of my own day, my thoughts, my small frustrations and joys, and for the first time, I felt the edges of my world blending with hers in a way that was tender, natural, and unexpectedly comforting. The more we talked, the more I noticed the subtle ways our bodies responded to each other. She leaned just slightly closer when explaining a memory, her fingers brushing against mine as she gestured toward a leaf or flower. I found myself adjusting, inching nearer, feeling the quiet thrill of proximity, the warmth of her arm near mine, the soft scent of her hair mingling with the evening air, the almost imperceptible hum of familiarity growing between us. Each touch, however minor, carried weight, a connection forming in the spaces between words, in the quiet pauses, in the soft laughter that punctuated our conversation. Time seemed to stretch, elastic and gentle, as though the world had slowed just for us. The city below continued its hum, but up here, on this balcony with its small collection of thriving plants, there was only this fragile, growing intimacy. She paused occasionally to tend a leaf or straighten a pot, and I noticed the subtle grace in her movements, the calm confidence that came from caring for life in this quiet corner of her world. By the time the sun had dipped fully and the sky deepened into soft twilight, we lingered without thought of leaving. She caught me looking at her once and smiled, a private, knowing smile that made my chest ache with warmth. We didn't need to speak, and yet everything was being said, the comfort in being near each other, the subtle attraction, the budding trust, the delicate pull towards something more. And as I finally stepped back to return home, I realized that something significant had begun, a shared rhythm of presence, of quiet understanding, of gentle curiosity about each other's worlds. The seeds of connection had been sown, tender and patient, and I knew it was only a matter of time before they would bloom into something far deeper, something that neither of us could yet name, but both of us already felt stirring in our hearts. It was a quiet evening, the kind that seems to pause time itself. I found myself lingering on the balcony again, drawn not by routine but by a subtle anticipation I could no longer ignore. She was there, hands deep in the soil of a small pot, adjusting a plant with careful, deliberate movements. The soft glow of the streetlights below mingled with the fading twilight, casting a golden haze over her figure. She looked up briefly, catching my gaze, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. I had learned to read the small rhythms of her presence, the slight tilt of her head, the thoughtful pause before touching a delicate leaf, the faint exhale that always seemed to follow moments of concentration. Tonight, however, there was something different in the air, something fragile and raw that made the usual calm of her movements feel charged. I noticed the subtle tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers lingered on the edge of the pot as though seeking support, not just for the plant, but for herself. I stepped closer, though cautiously, wanting to offer some kind of silent reassurance without breaking the quiet intimacy. "You've been spending a lot of time with these plants," I said softly, almost as an observation, almost as a question. She looked up, eyes holding a flicker of something I hadn't seen before, vulnerability. A pause stretched between us, delicate and uncertain, and then she spoke, her voice quiet, almost a whisper. "I'm lonely without you." The words hit me like a sudden, unexpected wave. They were simple, direct, yet heavy with unspoken meaning. I froze, my chest tightening, caught off guard by the raw honesty of her confession. It wasn't a flirtation, it wasn't playful, it was real. Deeply, achingly real. And in that moment, the careful balance of restraint and longing that had existed between us shifted, tilting towards something more tender, more intimate. I noticed her hand gripping the edge of the railing, knuckles pale from the pressure, as though anchoring herself against the weight of her own emotions. Her eyes met mine, wide and searching, silently asking if I understood, if I felt the same pull, the same emptiness she had just exposed. The air between us seemed charged, heavy with possibility, yet held in a gentle pause, as if the world itself was waiting for my next move. A faint breeze stirred, lifting strands of her hair across her face. Instinctively, I wanted to reach out, to brush them back and offer a steady presence, but I hesitated, aware that this moment needed care, not action. Instead, I let my gaze linger, letting her see that she wasn't alone, that her words had reached me fully. The warmth of her admission wrapped around me like a fragile thread, delicate yet impossible to ignore. She shifted slightly, releasing a quiet breath, and for a moment, neither of us moved. I felt the invisible weight of her loneliness, the quiet ache behind her confident exterior, and realized that what she needed was not grand gestures, but simple acknowledgement, presence, understanding. My own heart echoed in response, a subtle, steady rhythm that matched hers in a way that felt almost sacred. And in that suspended moment, I knew something essential had changed. The space between us was no longer defined by hesitation alone, it was charged with honesty, with vulnerability, with the quiet, unspoken promise that we could explore this connection together, gently, carefully, slowly. After her words lingered in the air, I felt an unfamiliar stillness settle between us. The balcony seemed smaller now, the space charged with something neither of us could name but both felt pressing close. I noticed her hands, resting lightly on the railing, fingers twitching ever so slightly as if waiting for permission to move, or perhaps waiting for me to reach across that unspoken boundary. My own hands tightened subtly around the ledge behind me, a reflexive anchor against the sudden pull of desire and caution. I stepped forward slowly, each movement measured, unsure whether she wanted me to close the distance. She looked up at me, eyes wide and vulnerable, yet flickering with a quiet courage. Her gaze held mine, steady and searching, and I realized that in that glance, we had both acknowledged a truth we hadn't dared voice aloud, the silent, growing attraction that had been building in the spaces between our words, the pauses, the accidental touches. The air was thick with anticipation. Every detail became sharper, the faint rustle of leaves in the gentle evening breeze, the subtle scent of soil and jasmine mixing with the warmth of her presence, the soft brush of the sun's fading glow against her skin. I could feel the warmth radiating from her even across the small space that still separated us, a magnetic pull that made my chest ache and my thoughts scatter. She shifted slightly, moving just enough closer that the tension of proximity became tangible. I felt my heart respond, each beat echoing in my chest like a drum, loud and insistent. I wanted to reach out, to close the gap entirely, to offer the comfort of my presence, but hesitation held me in check. This was delicate, precious, and fragile. A wrong move could shatter the fragile intimacy we were beginning to understand. Her lips parted slightly, as though she wanted to speak but chose silence instead. That pause carried more meaning than any words could, an invitation and a warning, a confession and a question. I realized then that the tension between us wasn't just about attraction, it was about trust, about timing, about navigating a space neither of us fully controlled yet both wanted to inhabit. A faint breeze lifted loose strands of her hair, and instinctively, I wanted to tuck them back, to offer a small gesture of care. But I stopped myself, letting my eyes hold hers instead, conveying the reassurance and acknowledgement that words could not capture. My pulse thrummed in my ears as we remained there, silently recognizing the magnetic pull between us, the shared understanding that something significant was stirring. Finally, I allowed myself a small, tentative step closer, careful, deliberate. She didn't flinch, instead, her shoulders relaxed slightly, a subtle acknowledgement that this proximity was welcome, that this connection, fragile though it was, could be nurtured. We lingered there, breathing in sync with the quiet night around us, sharing the invisible weight of mutual recognition, hesitant yet resolute in our unspoken desire. In that suspended moment, I understood that the most profound part of intimacy isn't action, it's acknowledgement. Seeing her, feeling her presence, recognizing the depth of emotion mirrored in her gaze, was enough to create a new kind of closeness. And as the sun dipped fully below the horizon, painting the sky in muted shades of rose and lavender, I knew that our bond had crossed an invisible threshold, we were no longer just two people sharing space. We were two hearts quietly acknowledging the pull of something far deeper, something neither of us could ignore. The evening air had grown cooler, carrying the faint scent of wet earth and evening blooms from her balcony garden. I remained close, hesitant yet drawn, aware of the delicate balance between presence and intrusion. She moved slowly, as if mindful of my proximity, adjusting a small potted plant while keeping her gaze softly on mine. I noticed the quiet tension in her posture, the subtle way her shoulders hunched ever so slightly, and I understood that she was navigating the same unspoken hesitations I felt. This was unfamiliar territory for both of us, yet neither of us wanted to retreat. I spoke softly, almost a whisper, "You've done well with these plants. They thrive here, under your care." Her lips curved into a faint, appreciative smile, a small acknowledgement that made the space between us feel warmer. She didn't respond immediately, instead, she shifted closer to the railing, her fingers brushing against mine as she moved a pot aside. That small contact, light, fleeting, lingered in the air like a secret shared only between us. My chest tightened in that gentle, anticipatory way, the kind that signals the beginning of something intimate yet safe. Encouraged by the quiet openness between us, I offered a tentative gesture, my hand hovered near her shoulder, a silent promise of support without force. She didn't flinch. Instead, she let the moment exist, her posture relaxing ever so slightly, her gaze softening. Slowly, almost instinctively, I rested my hand lightly on her shoulder, careful to keep the touch deliberate yet gentle. The warmth of her skin against mine, the subtle shift of her weight toward my hand, sent a quiet, almost electric acknowledgement through me. It wasn't desire, it was presence, recognition, and comfort. We moved together toward the small bench tucked into the corner of the balcony. She lowered herself gracefully, and I sat beside her, aware of the subtle brush of our shoulders. It was close enough to feel, distant enough to respect. The world around us faded, the distant hum of traffic, the faint flicker of streetlights, even the soft rustle of leaves in the evening breeze became part of the quiet intimacy that wrapped us in a cocoon of safety. Conversation continued, gentle and deliberate, drifting from plants to small joys, to fleeting memories and quiet fears. Her hand occasionally brushed mine, each time a subtle confirmation that she welcomed my presence. I noticed the calm steadiness in her breathing, the occasional quickened pulse when our fingers met, the warmth of her body near mine. Every small gesture, every shared glance, was a building block in a bridge of trust and affection. Time moved slowly, unhurried, and we lingered there as the last light of the day softened into twilight. I felt the quiet satisfaction of closeness, the kind that doesn't need words or declarations. She rested her hand lightly over mine, a tentative seal of comfort and trust, and I responded instinctively, letting my fingers rest gently atop hers. It wasn't a kiss, it wasn't a declaration, it was acknowledgement. I'm here, and I care, and you are not alone. As the sky deepened into soft shades of blue and violet, I realized that this small balcony, surrounded by the scent of earth and blooms, had become our shared sanctuary. The tension between desire and restraint, hesitation and warmth, had softened into a gentle closeness that promised more. And as we sat together, quiet but connected, I understood that sometimes the most profound intimacy begins not with words, but with a shared presence, a gentle touch, and the courage to simply stay near someone who matters. The night had settled softly over the neighborhood, the sky a deep indigo sprinkled with the faint shimmer of distant stars. On the balcony, the faint glow of the streetlights mingled with the warm hues of the indoor lamps, creating a quiet, almost magical sanctuary. We sat side by side on the small bench, shoulders brushing, hands occasionally touching as we tended to the last of her plants for the day. There was no rush, no need to fill the silence with words, the air itself carried the warmth of understanding, the comfort of shared presence. She rested her head lightly on my shoulder, the motion almost instinctive, as if seeking a refuge she had long denied herself. I felt the steadiness of her heartbeat against mine, each thrum a quiet affirmation that she trusted me, that she felt at home in this small, suspended moment between us. My fingers traced the outline of her hand where it rested against mine, careful, deliberate, letting her feel the silent reassurance that I was here, that I belonged in this space with her, just as much as she did with me. We talked quietly, voices soft and measured, sharing small reflections about the day and the fleeting joys it had offered. Her laugh was light, tinged with relief and contentment, and each time it reached my ears, it felt like a balm to the quiet ache I hadn't known I carried. In those moments, the walls we had built around our hearts seemed to dissolve, leaving only the fragile but undeniable bond that had been growing, slowly and carefully, over the past days. The subtle closeness, the gentle touches, the quiet acknowledgement of each other's presence, it all coalesced into something profound yet simple. There was no need for grand gestures or dramatic declarations. A hand resting lightly on a shoulder, a brief intertwining of fingers, a shared glance that said more than words ever could, these were the markers of our connection, the language in which our hearts spoke. As the evening deepened, she leaned back slightly, eyes lifting toward mine, reflecting the muted starlight. There was a softness in her gaze, a quiet joy that mirrored my own, and I felt a swell of warmth at the thought that our worlds, previously separate, had begun to intertwine so naturally. I realized then that our slow, careful journey, marked by hesitation, curiosity, and small, tender acts, had reached a gentle but firm point of emotional fulfillment. We were no longer merely aware of each other, we were present for each other, fully and sincerely. Finally, we rose together, tending to the last few leaves with shared care, and I noticed the small smile she gave me, one of quiet satisfaction and unspoken promise. There was a sense of completeness in the way we moved together, a harmony forged through patience and respect. The balcony, with its assortment of thriving plants and lingering scents of soil and jasmine, had become a witness to our bond, a private stage for a story of connection and care. As I stepped back toward the door, her hand brushed mine one last time, lingering, not out of urgency, but as a gentle seal of trust and warmth. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice soft and sure. I simply nodded, letting the moment speak for both of us, knowing that in this quiet, deliberate closeness, we had found something rare and lasting. And as we shared that serene silence, I understood fully that slow-burn love wasn't about grand proclamations or fleeting passion, it was about presence, patience, and the quiet joy of being with someone who makes your heart feel at home.